In some ways, though, it has been those technologists sort of coding themselves out of a job.
I'm Jeremy Hobson, and this is the follow-up, our weekly podcast you can only get here on the Middle podcast feed. And before we get into this episode, I have two live events to tell you about coming up in the next several months. We're going to be in Kenosha, Wisconsin, recording an episode of our show on May 12th. We will be in Portsmouth, New Hampshire on September 29th. We are also working on a show in Dallas before the election. And a reminder that if you are a paid subscriber to the Middle on Substack, you get discounts or even free tickets to our live events. And it's only $5 a month. So pretty cheap to be a paid subscriber. So today we are following up on our show last week about whether or not AI could take your job, or maybe it already has, because we certainly heard from a lot of people for whom that is already the case. There was one prediction, which we talked about on the show, that says AI-induced automation could wipe out 100 million jobs in the United States over the next 10 years. So joining us now to follow up on this is Wall Street Journal columnist Callum Borchers, who covers major shifts in the workplace with his column. Callum, it is great to have you here.
Glad to be back, Jeremy. Thanks for having me.
Well, and are there any other major shifts in the workplace that you cover that come close to what AI is doing right now?
Oh, man, it's hard to imagine anything coming close. I mean, it sort of touches a lot of other areas. I mean, return to office remains a hot topic, for example. I wrote at the beginning of the year about the so-called office creep phenomenon or hybrid creep phenomenon. This is sort of like the gradual return to office brought on more by peer pressure, maybe than like a new mandate. But everything relates to AI in one way or another, Jeremy, right? AI is part of this, right? When people are feeling kind of insecure about their job status, one of the ways that manifests is, hey, maybe I better show a little FaceTime with the boss and come in more often.
Interesting. So it's all connected. Which industries would you say have been hit the hardest by AI job loss so far?
You know, it might be tech, which is sort of ironic. I mean, the people I talk to, routinely mentioned that, the traditionally the fear of automation was sort of very mechanical, right? So we thought about people are going to lose jobs on assembly lines, right? And of course that has happened. Or maybe, the robots are going to fold the laundry, right? And you'll have fewer, hotel workers or something like that. And some of that does go on. But in some ways, though, it has been those technologists sort of coding themselves out of a job in some cases, or
right.
At least, putting themselves on thin ice. And perhaps that was foreseeable, but I think for others, it's come as a little bit of a surprise. And I think the other thing to keep in mind too, though, is from a business standpoint, if you're looking for substantial savings, you can achieve a whole lot more cost savings if you need fewer highly paid engineers. Right. You can say, OK, well, we need, fewer people to drive the forklift in the warehouse, let's say. And there's some savings to be achieved there. But there's a if you're paying that warehouse worker $20 an hour, $25 an hour, you're not going to save as much as you would by, maybe not needing a $200,000 or $300,000 engineer.
Right. And also, interestingly, and to that point, it seems like it is harder so far for the robots to do the manual labor stuff than it is for them to do the thinking. And so maybe that is why we have seen more of these white collar jobs go. And, we heard about it on our show. Andrew Yang talked about law firms, all those associates that come in right out of college, right out of law school. Those are the ones that are the easiest to replace with AI right now.
Yeah, it's wild. I mean, I did a story a while ago about some parents who work in tech who are encouraging their own children to maybe pick up the trades or go into something in the arts and sciences, for example, because sort of crazily, it sounds like that might be more stable. I mean, I'm thinking of one father, for example, who, told me, yeah, his daughter wants to go into one of the STEM fields, but really he's encouraging her to keep up with her dance. She dances, as a high school student, but he said, look, I'm looking at her teacher who owns the studio. I think it'd be pretty hard for AI to replace that. People are still going to want to go for a real human in-person dance lesson. So I don't know, keep up with that, honey, is apparently his message to his daughter. Maybe,
Right.
the fallback plan, which is sort of backwards, right? I mean, typically we would say, oh, my child dreams of going into the arts. They want to be a dancer, musician, or artist or something like that. And we'd say, no, make sure you go get that STEM degree. That'll be the fallback plan.
Right.
This is kind of the backwards version of that.
Well, and I think that gets to the point that we heard from a lot of callers, which is there's just so much uncertainty about what is going to happen, but we know there is going to be dramatic change. Listen to what this caller had to say.
This is Michael from Boulder. I work for one of the really big tech companies, unnamed, of course, and I work directly with AI, with all of the big models and coming up with how we think jobs in the future will actually begin to materialize. Because the answer for if jobs are going to be taken away is not a 100% yes, it's a both and. So yes, jobs will be taken away, jobs will morph, and jobs will evolve.
What does that mean to you, Callum? Is there some hope for some workers, or how might jobs evolve?
I think there's plenty of reason to hope. I think what it's going to take, though, is a little bit of imagination on both sides, right? That phrase I keep hearing is transferable skills, right? So in other words, maybe the exact job description that you have today does not exist 10 years from now. Let's just pick a number, right? But surely some of the skills that you brought to bear in your current role could transfer to something else. But will you have the vision to see what else you might apply your abilities to? And will a prospective employer be able to see the potential in that as well? And right now, what I hear constantly is some frustration on both sides, Jeremy, especially from the job seekers who are convinced, I guess what else would they say, but they're often convinced that surely I could do this job that I see posted, but the employer is looking for X years of direct AI experience. They're looking for someone who's basically done the open role almost to a T in the past. So will employers have enough imagination to kind of take a shot on workers who haven't done a job that's kind of new, but maybe they have a skill set that is transferable?
Well, and also, as we got into in the show, are the employers the ones who are making that choice, or is it an AI model that is figuring out whether your resume gets through and you're actually going to be even considered for that job, which so many companies are just using AI for that at this point. Here's another perspective. Listen to this caller.
Hi, my name is Christina Kohler, and I reside in St. George, Utah. I work as a front desk personnel at a tour company, and my fiance is a tour guide. I don't think that AI will take our job just because we cannot replicate the wonders of the human experience, exploring beautiful geology and sites and nature of public lands, and more importantly, the bonding that families get to create together.
So there you have it. Somebody who believes that you can't just replicate that human connection that real people offer in their jobs. What do you think about that?
I hope she's right. I mean, I think this is sort of that test that's going to be hard to answer, and maybe it'll be very role dependent. But kind of, what's the creep factor? I mean, I'll put it that way. Like if you're a consumer, what are the things that kind of weird you out if it's not a real human? And maybe that's one of them. In other words, do you want to go, I'm talking to you in the Boston area, Jeremy. I mean, do I want to get on a duck boat tour? You know, I mean, I'm used to getting on there with some, real human with some, corny
Making
Boston
jokes.
themed nicknamed.
Right.
Yeah, exactly. And I want a character, right? I mean, I want the real, so I would like to think that people would say, no, I don't want to listen to some like AI recording of that or with some self-driving duck boat that is unmanned. No, give me the real deal. I'm picking an example, but my hope is that there are roles like that. But it's going to be a question, right? What are the jobs that people value where they say, no, I won't settle for an AI replacement. I want the real human. And I don't know which ones will win and which ones will lose. And it's probably going to be a blend of the two.
As an aside, when I lived in Boston at the very beginning, I lived right next to where the duck boats picked up. And I was so happy when I moved later to a neighborhood where there were no duck boats. Because
but if they were gone, you'd miss them, wouldn't you?
I mean, I like them riding around. I just don't love being in a place where everybody around me is a tourist. It doesn't feel like a real neighborhood to me. But anyway, in a moment, we are going to be talking about what people can do to maybe make themselves more resilient in the face of AI-induced workplace changes. We'll be right back with the Wall Street Journal's Callum Borchers. Welcome back to the follow-up. I'm Jeremy Hobson. I'm joined by Wall Street Journal columnist Callum Borchers. Callum, some say the real threat is not the robots, but actually corporate greed. Listen to this voicemail that came in.
This is Angela Jackson. I am calling from Pasadena, California. It might be semantics, but I think it's important to rephrase the term AI is taking our jobs. It's not. AI is not taking our jobs. Employers are giving the jobs away because they want to increase their profit margin. That's really what it is. It's the same when they put the blame on the technology or the resource being used. It's to vilify the thing that they're using rather than they themselves. And so, yeah, it's semantics, but it's important in this case, especially because, again, it's the people who are at fault is not even necessarily the AI companies. They have their own issues. It's the employers who are using it to replace humans.
Very interesting. What do you think? I mean, that it's the humans that are in charge of the robots, at least for now. Whatever happens is our fault.
Listen, she makes a really strong point, and this has come up more and more in my conversations with both economists and technologists recently who have said, look, now hold on, AI is a real threat to people's jobs. It is going to displace, but that there is a little bit of hyperbole going on right now. Or maybe you've heard the term AI washing. This is referring to these sort of AI washing some layoffs or some job replacements right now. In other words, it's a convenient cover. You know, if as a business leader, you've kind of made some miscalculation. I'll give you a common example, right? So a lot of businesses hired like mad coming out of the pandemic. Arguably, they overhired and now they have to correct, right? They're sort of downsizing because they overshot. And it's a nice narrative to be able to tell the public, to tell investors, we're reducing headcount right now because we have gained all these new efficiencies because of artificial intelligence, right? That makes you sound savvy. That makes you sound cutting edge. That's a whole lot better story, Jeremy, than saying, like, actually, I screwed up. I hired too many people the first time around. Now I have to kind of go clean up and fix my mistake. So I think she's on to something here. I mean, I just had a conversation, with the principal analyst at Forrester Research, for example. And, he, according to their calculations, they estimate that it was less than 100,000 jobs that were lost really, truly to artificial intelligence last year. And that's, we're talking a single-digit percentage of all the layoffs in 2025. So it's not zero, but there maybe is a little bit of exaggeration here. Businesses are making strategic decisions. They're going different directions, whatever other language they want to use. But sometimes they're blaming AI for those decisions.
Interesting. Yeah, I was speaking in a journalism class, a media class the other day, and was asked how we use AI on the middle. And I started to think about, the various ways, which is not that much. I'm actually very proud of the fact that our calls are screened by actual human beings rather than by an algorithm or by AI. But I was also thinking of, when we pull clips for social media, like a clip from this podcast, if we want to put it out on social media, there are AI tools that do that we have used in the past. And what we found is that we actually get better clips when we just have our digital social media producer pull it himself, as opposed to having the AI do it, because sometimes they do a good job and sometimes they don't. Are there businesses that you have found that are actively trying not to use AI or not to replace their workers with AI?
I have, and what's interesting about them is they are sort of billing that human touch as a premium product. Which is sort of funny, right? I mean, the real. I mean, think about another example I've encountered in my recent reporting is customer service representatives, right? I mean, we're accustomed by now to you're picking up the phone and getting some kind of robo voice and press 1 for this and whatever, and you sort of are used to talking to a bot. And maybe if you stamp and scream loud enough, you eventually get through to a human. There are businesses though that make a point of pride of advertising to say, no, we're staffed by real live people. If you call us, you'll get hold of somebody, and they're sort of touting that as an attractive element. Now, maybe you pay a little premium for it, and again, I'll be sort of curious in the long run to see how do consumers respond to that. Are they willing to pay a little extra for that human touch?
I have noticed with CVS pharmacy, you can get a person. You have to go through the AI, but once you get a person, it's so nice. Okay, let's listen to one more voicemail, kind of a hopeful note. Listen to what this caller had to say.
Hi, my name's Gabe. I'm a service plumber in the historic city of St. Louis, Missouri. And honestly, AI has done wonders for my crew. If we run across a valve or a faucet or a part that we can't identify, Google usually does a pretty good job now. It's excellent for explaining the intricacies of plumbing code really quickly without having my guys poring over text, city codes. Honestly, I would love it if AI could do more to take my job, as long as it doesn't cut us out of a seat at the table, right? Right now, our guys don't see how they can get a robot under the sink to change a faucet, or, much bigger jobs like removing all of the cast iron and lead from a building and replacing it with modern materials. If you can send more robots to help us out, but we get the paycheck, I am in.
Okay, more robots, but we get the paycheck. Is that realistic?
I have my doubts, Gabe. I mean, I like your vision, but yeah, I mean, it's hard to think of examples in history where we have done less work and reaped more of the benefit. Right. I mean, when we see, I mean, this has come up a lot. For example, there's a researcher at Boston College named Juliet Shore who's written a book about the 4-day work week experiment, for example. And when I have my conversations with her about artificial intelligence, I've sort of asked her, I mean, like, what is the precedent here when we get more productive? Right. So in Gabe's example as a plumber, maybe he can do his jobs faster. Right. With the help of AI, he doesn't waste time trying to identify this part and, figure out the plumbing code and whatever. But I would be surprised. Maybe Gabe will call and follow up. I'd be surprised though, Gabe, if your manager says that's great, you were more productive today. You got through 5 jobs in the time that it used to take you to do just 3. Why don't you just take the rest of the day off? Or why don't you take a 4-day work? Right? I mean, that a few businesses have tried this. Right? They'll go to the 4-day work week and give their workers an extra breather. But that's the exception to the rule, right? I mean, typically when we get more productive, the demands rise along with it.
Well, but what about the other idea that is connected to this, which is universal basic income, that some people think is what's going to be needed in order to live in a world where robots are doing more and more? You got to just have the government pay everybody a certain basic salary so that we aren't just all destitute.
Yeah, it's a good question, and some of the towns around me here in Massachusetts have kind of experimented with it with varying degrees of success. I think that is an idea that perhaps will continue to gain some traction. Of course, the counter argument though is that that sort of stifle innovation in some way, right? I mean, it was in a slightly different context. It was interesting, Jeremy. I was at a recruiting event recently with a contingent from Finland. That was coming over, and they were trying to poach sort of like science and technology workers from the Boston area and saying, hey, the grass is greener. Come on, work in Finland with a little bit. They didn't use the term universal basic income, but they did describe Finland as more of a welfare state, right? Mm-hmm. And this is kind of a stable place to kind of come and advertise that it's very attractive. And it was interesting talking to some of the Finns who were in the room and talking to them about it sounded so great. Why did you come here? Why did you come to the U.S.? And some of them said actually it was a little bit too stable. It was a little bit demotivating in a way. I sort of wanted to be in an environment where you really had to strive and achieve, or you were really going to struggle. So it's just it's two different ways of doing things. I'll be curious to see which way kind of wins out.
Callum, what do you think is the one thing that our listeners should do to protect themselves against changes to the workplace caused by artificial intelligence?
The biggest thing that I've taken away from my conversations with workers and people who know a lot more about AI than I do is to, first take a breath and then second, very clearly identify what is going to be worth your time investment when it comes to this so-called upskilling, right? You hear this, you need to upskill, you need to AI upskill. If you just enroll in some, massive open online course that's kind of a generic AI, don't expect to be able to slap that certificate on your resume and go knock the socks off of some employer who says, "Oh, wow, Callum really knows his stuff about AI." It doesn't work that way. You need to get very specific. What are the job functions that I do that could be enhanced by artificial intelligence? How am I going to make myself stand out? You have to be really precise, and you need to start building a portfolio. I think that we typically think about people in the arts, maybe, right? Like you need a portfolio of your design work or something like that. I've heard increasingly from hiring managers that of course having some AI fluency is no longer a differentiator on its face. What they want to see is show me a portfolio, show me a project that you completed with AI, and can you articulate to me how did you use it to do the work better or faster in some way? So it's job specific upskilling. and it's being able to articulate the narrative that says, this is how it makes me better at my job.
It makes me wonder how soon we're going to have AI class in like elementary school so that people can be ready for that kind of question when they get, to the job market.
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, they're already dishing out the Chromebooks, right, to the kids in, kindergarten, first grade.
Yeah.
They start very young. The kids already spend a lot of time on their devices. And of course, it's interesting too to see other schools that have kind of swung the other way. Again, it's kind of funny to see, schools in my district. We have a lot of options. There's charter schools, there's school choice, and some of the places sort of advertise old school learning. We don't use the devices as much because we think that they're sort of like paper and pen. And even that reminds me, Jeremy, too, of a conversation I had with some of these AI researchers about what are sort of the old school tasks that you insist on doing yourself. I was struck by people, for example, they work on something like Copilot, the AI assistant from Microsoft, and yet they take their own notes during meetings. And I would say, well, why? Copilot's very good at, summarizing the transcript. Mm-hmm. And they say, well, yeah, it is, but there's something about that hand-brain connection, and I find that I actually remember things better if I do it myself. So I guess what I'm saying about that is it's in some ways it's going to take a kind of an affirmative choice by us, because in so many avenues of our lives, there will be a more convenient, easier way out, something that we can kind of outsource to a bot. And I think many of us will have to decide what are the things that we actually are just going to insist on doing ourselves the old-fashioned way for one reason or another.
Okay, it's time for a prediction from you. It doesn't have to be about AI. It can be about anything. What is it?
Well, I'm feeling optimistic because I think spring is coming, although there continues to be some frost on the ground. So as I talk to you from Boston, I'm gonna call it right now. The Red Sox are going to win the pennant this year. I'm going to stop short of World Series. I'm not sure anybody's toppling those darn Dodgers. They just keep spending and amassing star after star. But I'm feeling good about my Red Sox as we go into this season.
It's really wherever I live, they win the championships. I was in Boston for like all the big wins. I've been in LA for the wins. I lived in New York when the Yankees won. I was in Florida when the Tampa. I mean, it's just wherever I am. I really should start betting on this stuff, but I haven't so far. Callum Borchers, columnist for the Wall Street Journal. Thank you so much for coming on the show.
Always fun to be with you, Jeremy. Thanks.
And thanks to you for listening to The Follow-Up. It was produced by Harrison Patino. I'm Jeremy Hobson, and I will talk to you soon.